and then, trying to blame, the election administration, the system, the election commission, the election workers, whomever. That's something that we had never seen happen in Europe or in the United States or in Japan. So, kind of a more developed countries until now in 2020 here in the US.
Which is a remarkable statement for where we are in our country, and we'll have to allude to that over the course of this about hour. So I introduced Smartmatic, but I think you've started to do that. But let me ask you in your words, what does Smartmatic do? What does it offer society?
Well, Smartmatic is really a full service provider of election technology and services. In this, we're a bit unique because, again, most of the other companies in the space are more focused on providing only boxes or only software. We actually have a very, very large service delivery capability where, especially in other countries outside of the United States, we do very large operations where we can operate elections and we can be running 70,000 people working on election day and managing, these extremely complex projects where everything has to work perfect on one day. And you have to interact, let's say in the Philippines, with 60 million voters on one day. So, these type of implementations have a specific type of mission critical requirements that you need, a very, very special type of organization. So again, we do hardware. We manufacture all of our, voting hardware. We design and manufacture all of our voting hardware. We develop 100% of the software that goes inside our equipment. And then we have this, range of services. That would be.
I alluded to how widely your technology is used, but I do want to be clear about that. I mean, where are your primary customers, at least currently?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, during the past 15 years, our technology has been used in 25 countries around the world, and it really goes everywhere, right? We were very active in the United States in 2005 and 6 and 7 because that was kind of a buying wave of election technology. However, that was a long time ago. All of that technology was replaced in the next few years until now in 2018, where we are only providing technology in the US to LA County. But in addition to this, of course, we have entire countries like Belgium or the Philippines. We have countries that go from the UK, where we are running the London election, what is called the General London Authority, the election in London, to Argentina. So, and also we have very different systems where, again, in the case of Estonia, for example, is the only country in the world where every citizen can vote online. So that's a very, very special system. It's a very special case study. It's a great example of remote voting where the security, we believe, is actually much better than, let's say, mail voting, which is the other form of remote voting. And I guess just to complete that, I guess the other thing where you will see a difference is in the investment that we've put in developing voting technology, again, over the past 15 years. Based on our estimates, we believe that our R&D budget over the past 15 years has been bigger than the rest of the industry combined.
Wow.
So and of course, we could have reduced that R&D budget and, let's say, increase our profits, but we are extremely, extremely passionate about, making this really work for the entire planet.
I'm curious because you mentioned Estonia, and Estonia has a well-known and highly developed technology sector. Have you found, as a general matter, that countries that have culturally accepted more robust use of technology have been more receptive to your technology? Or has it cut the other way, as it sometimes does when people feel like they know technology perhaps too well?
Well, I think it's very hard to answer that with a kind of one size fits all. I mean, you have a cultural tradition in every country. You have a legal tradition, you have an election tradition. And I think all of these things combine to create some sort of a predisposition in favor of, or against technology. And even for those that like technology, like the United States or like Estonia, there is also a predisposition to what kind of technology do they prefer. So there is a lot of emotional components and cultural components involved, not necessarily rational, scientific. I mean, there are also rational and scientific components, but it's not 100% rational and scientific.
We're chatting with Antonio Mujica, the CEO of Smartmatic, on KZSU-FM, Stanford, and Hearsay Culture. So you alluded to it earlier, Antonio, and this is what Hearsay Culture is about. There is a view of coding sometimes as focusing on the functions of the technology rather than how it's actually used in the ethics. I'm curious whether when your company codes to some degree based upon where the technology is going to be used in light of those cultural differences.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the security code and let's say the core of the code is basically the same, right? But I think the form factor, the moment when you, let's say, vote, if the paper trail comes before or comes after, what happens to that paper trail? Where is it put? What is a preferred method of remote voting? Is it mail voting or is it internet voting? I mean, here in the US, you guys still have, for military and absentee voters, you vote by fax. I mean, so, there are some crazy kind of legacy systems as well. And again, they don't necessarily have to do with a purely rational position, but more with that kind of a, tradition and I mean, politics are a bit messy. So, it's part of a political process improving the election administration, right?
I have some not quite fond memories of using 1970s computer technology in the mid 1990s in the New York State Assembly to draft legislation. More on that maybe another time. Let's talk specifically about your voting solutions for all people, your VSAP technology. Particularly, I found it fascinating that it has accessibility features designed, as you point out, for the range of humanity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, LA County worked for about 10 years in designing what they thought would be, the best voting system in the United States. And it's really to their credit. They put so much effort. They really met with absolutely everyone. They involve academics. They involve, people from the kind of Silicon Valley community. They hire IDEO, the famous design company. They had Gartner Group involved. And they met with, I think, every type of accessibility group and any type of group with special needs for accessibility to make sure that they were taken into account. So definitely, among other things, this is no doubt hands down the most accessible system that's being used today in the United States. And I mean, it's not what we say, it's what basically all the voters say.
How do you define accessibility in this context? What makes the technology accessible?
I mean, it's probably a bit too long to list everything, but of course, in the case of LA, the vote it can happen in 13 languages, and it happens in 13 languages at the same time. You have a screen that allows you to make your choices and make sure there is zero confusion about voter intent. But at the same time, that gets printed, as you probably know, in a ballot, in a paper ballot, that then gets counted, at a different stage in the process. The experience of voting is very well designed for, wheelchairs and people with, mobility problems to be able to cast their vote independently. The same happens for people that have visual problems, that have hearing problems. So, I mean, it was really, really beautiful to see, all this kind, to see all these people, being able to independently vote and being very satisfied with the experience,
Of course. Antonio, let's turn to the current controversy that has put your company unwittingly on the front page of newspapers throughout the globe. Describe the current controversy in your own words, please.
Ooh, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. What's been happening is, there has been a significant amount of completely false claims made about our company, and they have been, amplified in the media, at least for a good 4 to 5 weeks, in prime time, repeatedly. And well, that of course had, forced us. We're always very apolitical. We don't take sides. I mean, we take our job very seriously. We never do donations for political campaigns, but we love media. We think media is, the cornerstone, or one of the cornerstones of democracy. But when this happened here and happens in the United States, it has a ripple effect over our entire operation worldwide. And that forces us to, to send legal notices to what we believe are the core sources of all this misinformation. And we had to engage, what we think are also the best lawyers in the space to work with this on this.
And indeed, you retained Eric Connolly from Bennett Friedlander, who is one of the leading defamation lawyers in the United States. He has sent letters to Fox News, to Newsmax, and to One America News Network, OANN. The letter to Fox News is public, or it has been made public, so I've had the opportunity to read it. I'm curious as to whether you have received any response aside from, and we'll get to it in a moment, the on-air, I'll use the word corrections that were aired by Fox News and Newsmax, but have you received any other response from those three networks?
Well, I'm shamefully, I'm not able to comment on anything that has to do with this because, we're in the middle of potential litigation.
Right.
But I mean, I think that, of course, the information will eventually come out.
Yeah, fair enough. Excuse me. And as an attorney and a law professor, I, of course, completely respect and appreciate that. I'll ask this question as well, although you might have the same answer. At this time, do you have any plans to bring any other actions against any other entities as it relates to these allegations made against your company?
Yeah, again, I wouldn't be able to tell you. This is something that's now with the council. So it all depends on their analysis.
Yes, which again, I respect the challenge of being both a journalist and an attorney, but I'm going to defer to my attorney judgment on that. Again, we're chatting with Antonio Mujica, the CEO of Smartmatic. Let's move to a related but different topic or line of questions. Based upon the letter, but also based upon what was aired, it was disturbing to me to see that it wasn't only just guests on these networks, but the hosts themselves that made statements that, based upon all evidence that is known and what has not been produced, seemed to be false. I'm curious if that experience has, and it sounds like a silly question, but I want to ask, has changed your view of the U.S. media landscape? In other words, if you can take a 30,000-foot view of this situation, which I recognize is challenging given that you're in the middle of it, what do you take from the fact that you've experienced this kind of behavior on the part of, at least in the case of Fox News, right, a very influential news network?
Right. Well, I mean, one thing, I don't think I'm qualified to let's say, make an opinion on all U.S. media, and of course there is a number of things that, as you know, we cannot comment on. But I mean, what I can tell you again is that a free, independent media is one of the cornerstones of democracy, and I think fighting disinformation is extremely important because they go hand in hand. And the other thing I can tell you is we've always cooperated with excellent journalists over the years in every jurisdiction where we operate. We support efforts to elevate election coverage. We actually sponsor and organize workshops for journalists so that they can understand better what election administration means and how voting technology works. Because in the end, educating the public, educating politicians, educating the media is a very important process. So we take media very seriously as this is a core component of elections.
Do you think at this stage of where we are that the interest of the voting machine industry writ large and the interests of the media in that sense are aligned in terms of transparency and information sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are naturally aligned, even if it's not something that has been naturally occurring, let's say over, especially in the US over the past, year or so, right? So, but I think naturally, of course, the entire voting industry, it's an industry that's built upon increasing transparency and security in elections. And of course, the purpose of media is also increasing this transparency about, kind of the entire democratic process. So they are naturally aligned.
Let's turn more specifically, Antonio, to your experience, your company's experience in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, and you've mentioned, the technology was used in Los Angeles County this year. Again, the only place in the United States where it was used. But interestingly, Politico referred to it as a, quote, risky voting experiment in March 2020. Pew also raised concerns, again, earlier in 2020. But according to credible reports, the experience seems to have gone reasonably well, although there were reports of some broken machines and long lines. What's your take on how your experience in Los Angeles County went? And in retrospect, would you have done anything differently in the, year plus long process that led to the approval of your technology for use in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I think something really important is that this was not just bringing our technology to LA. This was a major overhaul of the entire voting system and the way of voting in LA County. So they were not just bringing a new system; they were bringing our system, which was for voting. They were bringing a new poll worker, poll notebook system, and they were changing entirely the voting centers and how they were distributed. So, I mean, it was a really absolute complete overhaul, which is extremely hard to do. And it was done in one go. So was that risky? Well, yeah, maybe some people might think that was risky. I actually just have to, I'm very impressed with the quality of the professionals and the people that work in LA County in elections. I think what they did, probably nobody else in the world could have been able to do. And when the primary, the primary was kind of a first test, it is true there were a little bit of hiccups. It was not related to any of our systems, as it was widely disclosed and on different independent reports. It had to do with other things. But then even those issues were all corrected for the November event, and I think it was a resounding success. That, of course, has been completely now, hidden under, let's say more scandalous news.
Let me follow up on that point, Antonio, with this question. The process for certifying and adopting voting machine technology is one that's rather complex, and we could spend the next 6 or 7 hours getting into that. We won't do that here, but I do want to spend some time on it, and this is a good time to do it. Describe, if you would, the auditing process for voting machine technology as you've experienced it, because I definitely think that most people, even people that are paying attention to voting generally, are not aware of the intricacies of that. So again, I'm asking you a question that we could take hours on, but maybe in a couple of minutes from your perspective, what does that process look like?
No, absolutely. Look, this is a highly regulated industry. I'm going to focus in the US because, every country has different processes and different certifications. But in the case of the United States, you have, of course, the EAC's federal standards that, even though they're called voluntary, the truth is that basically everyone that wants to play in this has to follow them. So, every vendor, every, voting technology company will be certified, normally under these standards. And that's done by independent accredited labs that then, basically represent, to the election assistant commissions that, all the standards are met. And of course, they review the source code, they review the hardware. I mean, it's a really, really in-depth review. In addition to this, is very common in many states, and California is a good case for that they have a state certification, which has an additional level of standards that sometimes can be even more stringent than the federal ones. So then you have to go through that certification process, which again, it's a very in-depth look into absolutely every minutia of the election technology that's being used. And only after all of that happens, then the system is certified to be used. In addition to this, something that we've always motivated or we've always promoted, and because the US has a rather robust certification process, is not, let's say, as important in the United States, but in other countries is very important, is we promote the review of both hardware and source code by the political parties that participate in an election. In this, again, we're very, very different to any one of our competitors, because we almost beg the political parties to make these source code audits, because we want them to be 100% sure that the software that's being used is absolutely perfect and that it does exactly what it needs to do. And that goes hand in hand with a certain number of processes which are complex, in which the source code is reviewed in kind of safe environments by the different political parties. Here I'm talking about different other countries, right? And then that software is compiled in front of the political parties, and a hash code is generated, and this hash code is then kept by everyone, and the hash can be reviewed and audited in every voting machine and in every tallying system in the future, to make sure that not even one bit of that software was touched. So these type of things are what make actually voting technology a lot more secure. I mean, we're talking orders of magnitude more secure than, let's say, more traditional forms of voting, but that are usually significantly misunderstood, even by those that know about cybersecurity, even by those that are interested in elections, but they're not really involved with elections. They just kind of see it from a distance, and they're making all these assumptions of how things work, but that's not how they work, right? So I think there's an educational process that needs to happen on that front as well.
We're chatting with Antonio Mujica, the Chief Executive Officer of Smartmatic, on KZSU-FM Stanford and Hearsay Culture. For those of you that listen regularly, you know that KZSU is a nonprofit, non-commercial radio station at Stanford University that requires donations from listeners like you to continue its diverse programming. You have a couple of ways to make a donation to KZSU. You can email our underwriting department at underwriting@kzsu.stanford.edu, or go to our webpage where you can click on donate. Antonio, let's follow up right there with that point. Given the lack of understanding of code generally, much less voting machine code, does it put a premium on your company and maybe more broadly your industry to not just be transparent, but in a very real way be actively engaged in regular and constant voter education? For example, by being perhaps more transparent even than the law requires.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that's exactly what we do. Even in jurisdictions or in countries where the law is not as developed, then we tend to influence, let's say, the framework of how the regulation should happen and the policy should happen, because of the introduction of technology actually brings all these kind of unintended extra structure and to the election process. So absolutely. I mean, there is, I would say, there is no limit for how transparent you can be, and for how much, I mean, the more you educate the public, the more you educate the politicians, the more you educate the media, the better it's going to be for everybody.
So I'm pleased to hear you say that. As you know, I have been a vocal critic of the voting machine technology companies generally for a lack of transparency, particularly around trade secrecy. And I want to be clear for the listeners that I'm not referencing Smartmatic here, but rather I'm referencing other competitors of your company and other companies that no longer exist to some degree, like Diebold that's been acquired elsewhere, where they claim trade secret protection. over code, right? Information that's valuable because it's not known by a competitor. Now, there is no doubt that their claims for trade secrecy have merit to the extent that, yes, there could be commercial damage to a company if their code are made public. But given where we are today, again, on January 7th, 2021, and in light of your answer, do you think that perhaps the industry needs to be even more proactive, even to the point of suggesting that trade secrecy concerns, while they have merit, might need to give ground to broader questions, putting aside the defamation claims that your company have made against industry? But I'm just talking generally for public confidence in the technology working. What's your response to that?
I'm going to give you two answers. One is yes, but the other, that's probably funnier one, is, look, I'm actually very happy my competitors don't disclose their source code, because that's a big differentiation between me and them. So right now, if you want disclosed source code, if you are a political party anywhere in the world, or an election commission anywhere in the world, you know that if you work with us, you can have full access to the source code. And we've done everything. I mean, we've done closed source code. We have created source code that is owned by the public entities. For example, LA County owns their source code. Okay, it's actually a publicly owned voting system. We just implemented it for them. In the case of Belgium, it's an open source voting system. So you can actually download the entire code from the internet. By the way, I don't advocate that, but that's how they wanted it.
Why not? Why not, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my preferred route and my recommendation to any politician or policymaker around the world, from, again, working 20 years in this space, is to have what we call disclosed source code, where you accredit parties to look at the source code, to audit the source code. And look, you can have thousands of people if you want, but it's different if you have, let's say, Stanford University, a group at Stanford University and MIT and Harvard and, I don't know, and the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, take a look, or an independent, third-party lab, than if you just put it on the internet and let anyone around the world to download it. In the case of one of our customers that has an open source system, I'm not going to mention the customer, when they put the source code online, well, the first 20 downloads came from hostile rival countries.
Right, countries.
Yeah. I mean, like, they were not downloaded in their own territory. They were downloaded from foreign countries. They were the most interested to look at the source code immediately. So look, does that mean that the system is less secure? No, it isn't. I agree. I mean, as a security expert, the security has to be, secure, even if somebody knows the source code. I agree with that. But why make it a bit easier, and create an additional surface of attack? So I don't believe in I mean, we've done it because if a customer wants it, we will do it for them. But my first priority would not be open source.
Given what happened yesterday, right? It underscores the fight that's been happening, at least in the United States, between the federal government, more or less, as represented by our current president, and Congress generally, and state election officials and secretaries of state. And we've seen a very stark, right, public battle between people from the same party, right? And I'm thinking about Georgia, for example, where you've got the Georgia Secretary of State defending, right, the accuracy and the efficacy and the success of the election in Georgia against allegations coming generally from our president and from the federal government. In the context of transparency, therefore, it raises a very hard question, which I'm going to pose to you, which is, why should a person, right, in a country where voting technology is used, and by that I mean electronic technology, right, trust its elected officials and administrative officials, right, with technology that it can't independently verify? It seems like in the current environment in the United States, it falls to, right, either your trust in facts and evidence, which unfortunately seems to be lacking in many quarters, right, or your trust in a particular government official. this is a problem not as much of the voting technology companies making, but it is a problem, of course, that you are at the center of. What does a fact and evidence-based person do, right,
No,
to
but
be sure that the technology is doing what the industry says it does in light of the governmental battles that are existing?
yeah, Dave. I mean, I mean, I would say that's not entirely accurate because
Okay.
remember, in the United States, the source code is audited. It's
Okay.
audited by an independent third-party lab
Mhm.
that then informs both the election official, in whichever state,
Yep.
the Secretary of State, the election officials, and the EAC that the source code actually is okay. So let's say this idea that even my competitors here in the US have source code that is completely secret and no one has looked at it, and that's not true. It's always being reviewed. It's always being certified at the federal level. It many times has been certified also at the state level. So, I think just what happens in the US versus other countries is you have a more kind of mature system in place where you outsource that auditing to special, labs and special entities like the EAC. Whereas in other countries, because that doesn't exist, then the audit has to be more ad hoc by, political parties and, let's say, other players that are built to do the job that here in the US is done by, the EAC and the. By the way, I think if both Democrats and Republicans wanted to audit source code, I would imagine that the general disposition would be yes. I mean, at least ours would be absolutely yes.
Yes. And again, the challenge here, and we'll move on. The challenge is what someone, right, who just wants to vote, right, and be sure that their vote is tabulated can do to inform themselves. And in a lot of ways, it seems quite clear, right, for example, that we had elections that function as they should have in the United States. And President-elect Biden did win that election based upon all the evidence that we have out there. And the challenge becomes, right, how to assure that the greater populace has the same level of confidence such that elections can go forward. And I think, unfortunately, it may very well fall to voting machine companies like yours to help correct the record as you're doing here in part today by virtue of this interview. So this is definitely something we'll have to come back to as well. We're chatting with Antonio Mujica of Smartmatic here on KZSU-FM Stanford. Let me turn to one of these allegations that have been made against your company, Antonio, and yourself personally. Your company has provided voting technology to the Venezuelan government in the past. You've denied any prior or current ties with the Venezuelan government, and in fact, no evidence has been offered to prove otherwise. Indeed, Reuters reported that you blew the whistle on turnout manipulation problems in Venezuela's 2017 National Constituent Assembly elections. What has your company, or did your company, learn from its experience in Venezuela, as well as other countries, that can be applied here in the United States?
Look, again, elections are complex processes. Sometimes, losing candidates or losing parties want to blame everyone but themselves for a loss. So that includes election officials, that includes the system. And in all these cases, there's all kinds of crazy stories built around this. It is true we provided voting technology and services in Venezuela from 2004 until 2017. Those elections were audited by the Organization of American States, the Carter Center, the European Union, and of course the local political parties, had witnesses on both sides. And there was never any breach ever found. Both the kind of Chavez side and the opposition side won and lost elections, with this system. So, it all becomes part of this, again, conspiracy theories. Something in addition that did happen, which is very, I would say is very sad, is that in 2017, when there was this National Constituent Assembly election in Venezuela, the opposition boycotted the election and they did not participate. So they did not send witnesses. They were not in the process. It was basically the government with themselves, right? There was no one from the opposition. So even though the system was never breached, not one vote was changed, everything, was as secure as always. When it came the time to report the turnout, the government decided to make up a number and report a turnout that was much higher than the reality. Because we were in the room, we were forced to blow the whistle on it, because we would not allow, that anybody would report a number that's not what our system is actually saying. And of course, because of that, we completely had to break relationship with Venezuela. And yeah, I mean, it was a difficult situation, which, by the way, we are having another legal action against the Republic of Venezuela because of the expropriation of our operation there, and because of the tens of millions of dollars that they owed us and never paid us after we blew the whistle on them.
So I just to be clear about that, the allegation is that the Venezuelan government has more or less stolen your technology to make it, to state it more simply for the listeners. Is that at its core?
Well, more than the IP,
Yeah.
what they did is they've used the IP without, without having the licenses to do it, and they basically took over all our entire kind of local infrastructure that we use to provide the services. So yeah, and of course, we were in. It was impossible for us to operate there anymore.
What is your confidence level that you'll be able to receive justice and remedies in that legal system?
Well, because this is something that goes to international courts and international arbitration, so we actually feel very good about it. But as far as our lawyers tell us, it will take a good deal of time. So
yeah, international disputes of that nature are notoriously difficult. Antonio, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of your time. I would be remiss again on January 7th, 2021, to not ask you just about your reaction of what you witnessed yesterday in Washington, and what your take is on what we saw.
Look, again, I don't want to take a political position for very obvious reasons. I am sad that the misinformation that was spread in part about us by the entities that we pointed to actually create this situation, because I think that's a big component of why what happened. So yeah, I'm extremely sad, and I think something that I think is very important. I don't know to what level it is understood here, is that here in the United States, is that if U.S. democracy stumbles, world democracy stumbles. So anything that happens here has this ripple effect across the globe when it comes to democracy, when it comes to election administration, and when it comes to the voting industry. So that's why, setting the record straight here is for us is existential.
Yes, and I think it's existential, of course, not just for your industry, but as you allude to, for a democratic free society. To that end, were you at least perhaps heartened by the fact that at least late last night on January 6, 2021, the Senate and the House returned to business, as Vice President Pence put it, let's get back to work, and that we saw procedure kick in, at least to the extent that we witnessed on television what we thought was a more proper functioning of at least the legislative process. Again, that's not a statement with regard to the allegations of a stolen election, which have been disproven and rejected by judges in the United States who were appointed by President Trump, as well as other prior presidents. Does that give us, or give you any reason for optimism the day after such horrific events being witnessed on television?
Well, I mean, I think that's what the entire country was expecting. No, I mean that the election was going to be certified. So I don't think I was surprised, and in a sense, I don't think that in itself is special, except for what happened before, which interrupted it.
Right, kind of a return to normalcy, as it were. Antonio, let's ask a few follow-up questions before I let you get back to your day. What is generally, in light of everything you've seen, what is generally your outlook for your industry in light of your company's experience and in light of your expertise within the voting machine technology, more broadly within the voting world?
Look, for me, it's a bit hard to talk about the whole industry. I definitely can't talk about us, about what Smartmatic is doing and will do. I think we will continue to innovate. I think we will continue to, iterate and improve our election technology and adapt it to the different cultures of the different jurisdictions where we operate. I think we have come a very long way as a society in making elections much more transparent and much more secure. I think there's a lot of work to do with communicating that, with educating the public. It does require, though, that people care. And I'm going to tell you, let's say, two bad examples of why these things are not happening. One of them is, I think, if I'm not wrong, and I'm sorry if I'm quoting something wrong, but I believe I read somewhere that, the 2020 campaign had a total cost of about $16 billion. I think probably, the size of the voting industry in the US is less than $300 million a year. So you can see how much are we investing in, let's say, running the elections and doing election administration, and how much are we investing, let's say, in campaigning. I mean, that probably is too big of a difference. So do we want better elections? Do we want a more educated public and media? Well, we need to invest more in that. It's not going to happen if it's so, if it's just something that is an afterthought, And the second thing is, I wish people care about elections all the time. I mean, I think about elections every day, but I would say that 99.9% of the people care about elections only after the election day and if their candidate lost.
Yeah, right, of course. Yes.
So, when you think about elections only once every 4 years, I don't think you necessarily have a lot of authority to say much about it. So yeah, I wish more people got involved. I wish more people got actively involved with the voting process, first in understanding the facts, and secondly even in participating, even as a poll worker, as an observer, as a be part of the process. I think that's what would be great to see in the future.
Do you see this as a crisis of civics? In other words, as someone that teaches law, I have found that I need to do quite a bit of work, even for law students often, to explain some of these basics of what it means to be a citizen in a democracy and what it means to care about the systems of government. Is it a problem of civics? Is it a problem ultimately of education? Or do you see other reasons for why we are here right now?
Well, I don't know if it's a problem of education, but I would say the solution is education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the sources of the problem might be several and not necessarily easy to pinpoint them all. But I think the only solution, maybe I wish there were more, and I hope we can find more. But the only one that I kind of see today, it's more education around the process and the elections and how everything works.
Yes. And to that end, and I'm not done quite yet, but that's why I am so grateful for you joining us today on Hearsay Culture. Given our changing times, right? And that's not just elections. What do you recommend by way of reading? In other words, what are you reading these days? And what do you see as the reliable places where you can get good information, but also wisdom?
Yeah, I imagine you're asking me specifically about elections, right?
Or just generally. Look, your company, Antonio, and you are at the center of what I think is a fundamental crisis in public confidence in democracy. That's why I asked the questions that I asked today. I also have faith in technology as being part of the solution, so long as you pointed out at the beginning, it is coded correctly and the people doing that work recognize the gravity of such a responsibility. So as someone at the center of it, I am curious. You have books behind you. Of course, my listeners won't see that, but we're on video. What are you reading these days that helps you make sense, for example, of what we're dealing with? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is I've read all my life since I was a teenager. I read about 2 books a week. So I'm an avid reader. And I read everything from fiction to very obscure, philosophies from every part of the world to, non-fiction politics, essays, everything. So it'd be hard for me to, let's say, to give you the whole spectrum. I would say that, I mean, the last book I really, really enjoyed was this book, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's very popular in Silicon Valley. I hadn't found Naval before, so I was extremely, extremely pleased and I was, very grateful to have found this book because I thought it was actually genius. So I turned into a big fan of Naval now. And yeah, I would recommend it to everybody. That's kind of a life lessons type of book. When it comes to elections, I think it's difficult. It's not the most, it's a bit of a dull subject if you think about it. I wouldn't recommend books, but I would definitely say that if you're in the United States and you want to understand what's happening with the elections, you should try to go straight to the source. Try to go to CISA, try to go to the DHS, try to go to the Election Assistance Commission, try to see what your election authorities say in your own state. And if you're going to consume media, I think something that, well, I had to learn, a couple of decades ago, but I wish more people did learn it as well, is try to read what everyone's saying. Don't go only with, the media from one side of the political spectrum or the other side of the political spectrum. Make sure by the way, which side are you reading. Don't believe this is simply the truth or this is it, but know, who's behind it, who's funding whom. All of these things are going to inform you and are going to make you understand reality instead of fantasy, and are also going to make you make better decisions. But of course, that requires a lot more work and a lot more effort on the part of the average citizen, right?
Absolutely. Antonio, let me ask you one last question, and then I will thank you for being on the show. And it ties directly to your last point. As an educator and someone and speaking of you, who is an avid reader and who clearly, in my estimation, has an interest in broader public understanding of these issues, I'm thinking of younger people. I have 2 sons who are 11 and 13. Trying to explain what's been happening, much less what happened yesterday, has been a challenge. But for younger people, and even people maybe in their teens or even in college, who are experiencing an election for the first time, what advice do you give them? What would you say to them in terms of understanding what they are seeing today and what they've experienced over the last year plus?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, let's say, thought it through yeah, I haven't thought about, let's say, those recommendations enough that I feel that I have a strong answer. But I mean, definitely, if it comes to elections, I recommend them to get educated and to get involved. I think participating in the election process, I mean, starting with voting, but even, working, at a poll station, being part of a process, I think is very, very important. And I think, the newer generations are, of course, extremely savvy when it comes to technology. I think they are actually probably a little bit wiser in the way they consume social media, and are able to kind of see these biases and these bubbles more than maybe other people that are more in the, I don't know, I don't want to give it a specific age, but like more middle age. And clearly we are in a big, this is a very long, it would be a very long discussion, but we are in a core transformation of society from an industrial society to an information society. I mean, that transformation, I think, already happened. it's been happening for the past 40 years, and especially for the past 20. I don't believe that the governance structure and the way that we share our political thoughts and structure them has caught up yet with that. So in a sense, I am convinced that we have kind of industrial era institutions that are obsolete for information era challenges. And that's something that we are going to see change. But as you can probably tell from just that headline, that's, I mean, you could write a book about that, right?
Right, right. Antonio Mujica, the Chief Executive Officer of Smartmatic, thank you for joining me today on Hearsay Culture. Thank you sincerely for educating my listeners, for taking some hard questions and answering them candidly and forthrightly. I am confident, based upon this interview and based upon my sense of things, that I am talking to someone who can really help us improve and learn and change our society in a way that we, God willing, would not see the kinds of behaviors that we've witnessed over the last several months and last several years recur. That requires education. And for that, thank you for joining me today on the show.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for the kind words, and thank you for having me here with you.
A pleasure. I am very excited to point out to listeners that this being the first show of 2021 for Hearsay Culture, that there is an exciting array of guests coming up in January and in the following months. For those of you that have been listening to the show since 2006, you know that the show took a bit of a hiatus during a 4-year period, and that I am in the process of relaunching and expanding Hearsay Culture's coverage as well as its audience, and to the points that I've been discussing with Antonio over the course of the last hour, to focus more broadly on how we can address these issues of misinformation and understanding to have a better and more cohesive society. So look for more information with regard to that going forward. As always, you can listen to Hearsay Culture on KZSU-FM Stanford. This quarter, it is on at 8 p.m. Pacific time on Fridays, but you can also pick up the show through any of your favorite podcast apps, as well as the iTunes store for the Center for Fairness and Society at Stanford Law School. As always, I welcome your comments, your suggestions, your feedback, your suggestions for guests that I might have on the show by emailing me at dave@hearsayculture.com or by clicking on the contact link at our webpage. Meanwhile, be safe, be well. Thank you for listening today, and please stay tuned to KZSU for more diverse programming. Have a great evening.